It's September 12th. Welcome, everyone. We are live on Facebook, and we are here with Kim McCleary, who has amazingly guided us through this journey from June 8th, where we held our first AWAKE Sleep Apnea Initiative meeting in the greater DC area. And we did that with the CDRH and the pharma divisions of FDA, and we are now ready to report on that meeting and the surveys that we did leading up to it. So with that, I'd like to introduce you all to Kim McCleary and Dr. Carl Stepnowski, our Chief Science Officer, to report on what we have learned up until this point. Take it away, Kim.
Great, thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. Good to be with you for this recap of the AWAKE Sleep Apnea Initiative. And what we hope to do over the next hour or so is give you a sense of kind of the reason for this initiative in the first place. And as Adam said, all the activity leading up to the June 8th meeting. And then Carl's going to share some of the findings from the really robust response we had to the patient and caregiver survey that was part of the AWAKE initiative, that I think that will carry a lot of weight going forward in terms of both ASAA's activities and shaping the field to be more patient-centered. So let me just kind of start off with some background about what this initiative was tethered to in terms of a kind of a broader movement that is really gaining momentum in the kind of the broader biomedical ecosystem. And that's this whole idea of being patient-centered. Now, for many of us, as we think about ourselves interacting with the healthcare system, we really would hope that it is designed from the start to center on what the patient needs and expects from whether it's your physician or the medications you take or the devices you use to try and achieve the best state of wellness that you can. But in reality, the whole system has really been oriented to different stakeholders, primarily prescribing physicians or surgeons or companies, and there has been this kind of lingering sense of paternalism about somebody else knows what the decisions are that you should be making better than you do. And I'm pleased to say that, you know, over the last particularly 5 to 8 years, this idea of putting the patient's needs at the forefront has really taken hold. And what's showing here now on the slide is kind of a bit of a dated cartoon from the Institute of Medicine about 12 years ago that portrayed kind of the system of how a medical product, whether that's a drug or a medical device like a CPAP machine, gets assessed by the system. And first, you know, once all of the evidence is collected from a clinical trial, at the top there, you can see that the FDA looks at the whole population of patients for whom this medicine or device is intended, and they have to weigh whether the benefits of using that particular medical product outweigh the potential risks to the population it's intended for. And they make that on kind of a very objective basis based on, literally skids and many hundreds of documents collected over many years of study in both clinical and laboratory settings. And they have to think about kind of the whole population. And then the next step in that, if it's approved for the market, would be the provider looks at a particular patient and they have to decide, is this medicine or device right for this particular individual, about what I know about their medical history, the other comorbid conditions that they might have, and they have to decide whether they're going to write that prescription or not. And then ultimately, finally, the patient gets to evaluate the benefits and the risks and to think of it in terms of their own personal expectations. Am I willing to potentially experience side effects or other effects of using this product, again, whether it's a medicine or a device, in exchange for what benefits it might provide to me? And do those fit in with the other things I'm doing in terms of my overall health, the other medicines or things that I'm taking. You know, can the side effects, can I mitigate those somehow so that I don't, you know, compromise my overall well-being? And that was kind of the traditional way of looking at it. And the patient, again, being at sort of the very end of all of this decision-making, and not too much consideration of their needs and expectations at these earlier stages. What we're moving toward, or what that kind of led to, is that the regulator, the person from the FDA, or the physician, and the patient could very much agree on kind of what the facts of that situation and that set of trade-offs might be, but they might have very different ideas about what the value of that would be, and how much benefit would be meaningful in the patient's life in exchange for how much of a risk of side effects or potentially adverse events like stroke or other things. And where we're moving to now, based on this whole series of activities called patient-focused drug development or patient-focused medical product development, was a series of activities launched about 6 years ago by the FDA at the urgent request of the patient community for the regulator, that top box on that last cartoon, to think more about what the patient experiences in their life with a particular disease or condition, how many other things they might be using in terms of treatment at the time that they're making a decision about a new thing that might be beneficial, and how well the available therapies are meeting their needs, and what are the kind of the unmet medical needs, if you will, that they are really prioritizing to achieve the best sense of health. So this new set of activities has really brought the FDA into close contact with a number of different patient communities so that they can understand that patient journey and that range of experience much better as they think about those regulatory decisions at the population level. And in 2017, that series of meetings that the FDA hosted for about 5 years was so successful in terms of exposing the FDA to all of the knowledge in the patient community that they opened up this gateway for what they call externally led meetings to be hosted by patient organizations and to bring this conversation to the FDA through the action of patient advocacy organizations like ASAA. And so far, there have been just a little more than 40 of these meetings held to date. And again, they have really changed the conversation over the last 6 years. On the devices side, very important to the sleep apnea community, there has been a similar push for incorporating patient perspectives kind of all along what they call the total product life cycle. And the part of FDA that studies medical devices, called the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, there at the bottom of that slide, has really been encouraging sponsors and innovators on the devices side to think about patients all the way through as they develop a new medical product or device or diagnostic test, or things that are used in combination, as in cancer, where you've got a test that is used to determine whether a particular drug is going to be successful. That requires a lot of collaboration between the Center for Devices and the Center for Drugs. And what this whole set of activities on both the drug and the devices side has led to is FDA's recognition that patient perspectives can be very useful in helping not only the FDA make better decisions, but helping the sponsors of clinical trials and new medical products to be better informed all along the way as they go through this multi-year, sometimes multiple decades of developing a new medical product. And these are just some of the ways, and kind of a little bit of industry speak, that patient perspectives are starting to be incorporated into the product development side of things, and not just how a medicine or a drug device, is used once it's available on the market. So what the future state is, rather than having this potential to agree on the facts but have disagreement about values, is really moving toward a future state where we at least agree on the facts and understand one another's values, and may not always agree on the values and the ultimate decision, but at least there's better information flow and a more informed perspective on the part of both the regulator. And we see, patients and patient advocates becoming more informed about what the constraints of the FDA are, what their concerns are as these new products come through. So this is kind of, again, the background of why we did the AWAKE Sleep Apnea Initiative. And, now I'm happy to kind of walk through what that looked like. And so with this new gateway that FDA opened for patient advocacy organizations to take a leadership role in convening their communities and bringing this really important information both to the regulators and to the life sciences companies, the American Sleep Apnea Association saw this opportunity, jumped on it in November 2017, and there's a whole process you have to go through to be approved for one of these meetings. So they submitted their request, letter of intent, to the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at FDA to be one of these hosts of a meeting. They got the word in February 2018 that the meeting was approved, and we set a date of June at that point to kind of correspond with the big sleep meeting that was happening in Baltimore around the same time. We were also successful in getting the drug side of FDA to bring in their colleagues on the devices side, because we knew that in sleep apnea, individuals experiencing that condition use a whole variety of things. And now we've got certainly quite a lot of data to back that up that Carl's going to go through. We spent kind of the early spring planning and recruiting sponsors and partners. We kind of laid out all of the communications, developed the survey, and in April we launched the initiative, started informing people about the meeting that was going to happen on June 8th and the survey opportunity. We had some webinars, and we started to recruit panelists for the June 8th meeting. The meeting was held, as you all know by now, June 8th. We had, you'll hear some of the the events that took place there, and some of the outcomes of the meeting itself. We kept the survey open until July 18th, just to make sure that anybody who heard about it through the meeting had the opportunity to participate. Closed that with the last response on July 18th, and then worked kind of feverishly over the summer to compile everything into what is now an 88-page report, very comprehensively kind of covering the whole initiative from beginning to end. But I will say the end is not the end. The end is just a new beginning, and that we have a lot of new material to take forward to really improve the products and the care that sleep apnea patients have access to. Just backtracking to this kind of February milestone of getting CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, together with the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, together on this meeting, was the very first time that one of these 40 meetings was identified as a patient-focused medical product development meeting, and not just a patient-focused drug development meeting. So a great achievement for ASAA to kind of be the broker and the first in on that piece of the frontier. I mentioned that we spent some of the early spring recruiting sponsors. We had 4 companies that participated in terms of providing some unrestricted educational grants to help defray the cost of hosting this meeting, and some other corporations or companies that were very helpful in terms of helping us get the word out, and Evidation Health providing great support on the survey. We also had a number of nonprofit organizations whose missions have alignment with the American Sleep Apnea Association, help to reach their communities with word of this meeting and the survey, and the opportunity to present their perspective. So we had actually, and you'll see this reflected in the data, a lot of people that experience sleep apnea as part of another condition, or that have had similar experiences, such as the Paralyzed Veterans of America. So onward to June 8th. This is what the hallway looked like early the morning of June 8th. Before we started welcoming participants to the meeting, we were at the Marriott in College Park, Maryland, which is just outside the DC Beltway. And the meeting format for the day was a full day meeting. Began with Adam's opening introductory remarks as the ASA patient officer. And then we had Dr. Shelley Burson, who is a triple board certified sleep specialist, give an overview of sleep apnea and its diagnosis, both from the standpoint of informing the FDA about what things look like from the clinical side of treating patients with sleep apnea, and also to help patients feel very open about sharing all the different things that they were experiencing. We found sometimes when there's a kind of overly academic, restricted presentation, it can lead people to feel like they have to just color inside the lines. And we definitely wanted to hear, as Adam would say, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it's like to go along this journey. Following Dr. Burson's first presentation on kind of the overview and the diagnosis, we had a panel of 5 patients talk about what they experienced on the way to getting diagnosed, the symptoms that were most impactful on their life, and how their life was affected by sleep apnea. And then we opened it up to the room. We had about 87 people in the room, and we had very much kind of an open dialogue, drawing on both things from Dr. Burson's presentation, and then the first person accounts from the 5 individuals who very courageously shared what they had been through. We took a break for lunch. We came back after the lunch break and heard from Dr. Burson again, this time on the overview of treatment for sleep apnea. And she covered kind of all of the different tools that she employs to help people get the best sleep and the best health. We had a second group of people, panelists, talk about how they were managing their sleep apnea, and also at the FDA's request, some of the things that got in the way of them managing their sleep apnea successfully. And then we had another facilitated discussion around the room about that, and spent some really focused time talking about these challenges to adhering to therapy. That was, again, an interest that the FDA specifically had in hearing directly from patients. And then in the wrap-up session, Katie O'Callahan, who's featured here at the bottom of the screen, from the Center Director's Office at the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, kind of reported back as to what she heard throughout the day, and also gave an overview of how FDA will use the information that was collected in this meeting and others like it to inform their regulatory decisions and, advance their thinking from a patient perspective. And then Carl Stepnowski, the ASA's chief science officer, and Adam kind of wrapped up the day with some closing remarks. So a very full agenda, very robust discussion, few pauses in the day, but we got a lot out of it. And some of what we heard, I won't read these for you, and certainly these clips all come from the report, so you can take a look at them yourselves. But in the conversation about diagnosis, people like Joelle DeBrow from Los Angeles talked about the many years of sort of misdiagnoses and missed diagnoses along the way to finally getting a diagnosis, and then it's a difficult treatment journey as well. Peter Stein shared a very compelling account of really dramatic events that finally got the attention of physicians and trained them on the possibility that sleep apnea was playing a role in a really confusing mix of medical and mental health challenges that he was facing. And then San Juanita Sanchez from Texas talked about how it really took kind of a family member recognizing that she was falling asleep and really struggling in her law practice to effectively represent her clients because she couldn't stay awake. And so those kinds of stories were the type of thing that you can actually watch. The webcast of the meeting is available up on the ASA site, and also read in the report. And then on the treatment side, a really wide-ranging discussion of things like CPAP that were very prominent in the conversation, the different medications that people use, the sort of journey of maybe trying to avoid CPAP by going with surgery, and then oral appliances, and what has worked and how things change over time as new symptoms appear and maybe recede. So we heard from Adam about that process of finally getting the overnight sleep study and having the CPAP applied during the night, and then having to leave and wait 2 weeks to get his own machine. Rick's experience of never having known what a good night's sleep felt like until he had CPAP that first time, and then people like Will talking about that journey of trying different things and really wanting more innovation so that this isn't the end of the treatment experience. You don't have to settle for the benefits, but looking ahead to maybe when a more complete solution or set of solutions is available. And then, as I said, the FDA was quite interested in barriers. So we heard from Eugenia about the difficult path that she had both to getting diagnosed and getting treated, and now she finds herself with all of these comorbid conditions that really make dealing with her sleep apnea so much more complicated. And from Celeste, who never had heard of sleep apnea, and so awareness was a big barrier for her getting treated, because she didn't even know that there was such a thing, and she didn't know that this opportunity for treatment even existed. And then from Paul, who was a lifelong highly successful athlete, but nobody would consider him to have sleep apnea because he wasn't fitting kind of that fat, overweight, middle-aged male at the time that he was trying to get diagnosed. So some of the barriers really rooted in some of the same challenges that people face in diagnosing and getting their condition diagnosed and treated. So one of the things that has come up in the course of these 40 meetings is the FDA's kind of increased focus and attention and interest in hearing from a very wide range of individuals from across the community. I mean, so often living here in Washington, D.C. and going to a lot of meetings on health policy, you see the same people advocating for conditions kind of meeting in and meeting out, and they're kind of known, and you could see my air quotes, as the usual suspects of people coming in and representing their condition. And the FDA has gotten very sensitive to the fact that those individuals, while their lived experience is certainly true to their experience, may not represent their community as the whole continuum of what individuals face. So we really took great effort to provide opportunities for as many people across the sleep apnea community as possible to participate in this AWAKE Sleep Apnea initiative. And you can see here, if you look at this diagram and think of kind of concentric circles, if you will, we had those 10 panelists who sat on the stage and really opened up their lives to a worldwide audience at the core of this. And then we had the 87 people in the room who contributed during those open mic discussions, and we also had some real-time polling going on. And from there, we had 465 people watching live via the webcast and Facebook Live, and they were also able to participate in the polling questions. And then finally, we had the survey that Carl will walk through to really bring in the voices of 5,000 more people in terms of what they have experienced. And I think that was a really powerful combination to have all of those opportunities and to really hear from, I think, not only kind of the middle part of the community, but the extremes on both ends of people who are doing really very well with what is available to them, and people who are really still struggling in spite of the devices and drugs that they might be have access to. Mm-hmm. So I also wanted to point out that with 5,630 people responding to the survey, there have been some other communities, the lupus community, the narcolepsy community, that have done surveys in connection with their PFDD or PFMDD meetings. But this response from the sleep apnea community is the largest so far in the series of 40 or so meetings. So another way in which sleep apnea community has led the pace for the larger, broader patient advocacy community. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carl to walk through the survey results.
Great. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Thanks, Kim, for that great introduction. And I just want to highlight on that last slide that we have a roadmap within the ASA where, drawing from the problems, the concerns, the issues that our community experiences, really drives the initiatives and the programs that the ASA develops. So this was one of our biggest outreach efforts ever, and we've learned quite a bit, and we have some really great information, some actionable information on where we should go and what we should do in the future. So what I'll do now is report on the survey itself, and a big thank you to Kim for all the work she did in helping to develop it and pull it together and analyze the data. She was instrumental in this entire effort. So what the survey instrument was 32 items, 32 different questions. It was a combination of multiple choice and open text fields, had 6 different sections, and we'll go over each one of those. It was first informed by the medical literature and questions that were commonly used, and by past PFDD meeting surveys, because we really wanted to pull out what we thought was going to be important for FDA to hear about and learn about. We first tested it on a group of patients and made sure it was understandable and the questions made sense. It only took about 15 minutes average time to completion. Sometimes you want to find a good balance with these because you want a lot of information, but you also don't want to have too much of a burden on people who are taking the time to fill it out. And we did have a very high completion rate, over 80%. Next slide. So we did 2 different ways of reaching out to the community to spread the word about the survey. The first was promotion through the ASAA channels, through direct emails, through social media, through press releases, and postings to various online patient communities. We deployed using the survey via the SurveyMonkey platform, and resulted in over 3,000 responses total. Our AWAKE partners and sponsors were also super helpful in helping to get the word out. A second way we did was to work with one of our partners named Evidation Health, and they have what's called an achievement platform, where they have an online community that's signed up, and they respond to different kinds of activities and surveys. And so we redeployed the survey to that group, to the Achievement Studies platform. And one of the things that Evidation does so well is get responses quickly. And so we actually have a publication in manuscript in review now with them about how fast we could recruit for research studies, and they delivered it again with the survey responses, getting over 2,500 in 6 days. Next slide. So in terms of who the patients or who the respondents were, we had 85% of the survey respondents were patients themselves, about 14% who were caregivers. And the way we'll present the data is first the combined of both platforms, and then it separately by the SurveyMonkey platform and by Evidation Health platform. And the reason is because the respondents differed in some certain characteristics. So we wanted to just be able to show you the data differently. And since we do a lot of team stuff within the ASAA, Kim and Adam, if you'd like to jump in on any of this on any of the slides, please just jump in to make sure we get all the important points out there. Overall, the percentage of male respondents was 41%, and female was 57%. We saw a little bit higher percentage for females on the Evidation platform, 52%, and 61% through the SurveyMonkey platform. 86% were diagnosed by a physician overall. 45% were diagnosed within 12 months of what they perceived as the onset of symptoms, which is great. I think if we did this survey 5 or 10 years ago, we may have had a much lower percentage, so that's good. On the other hand, it's only single digits, but those who were diagnosed 10 years or more after perceived onset of symptoms was about 7% overall, 9% from the SurveyMonkey platform. And diagnosed within the past 12 months, about 6%. So most people who had responded had that sleep apnea diagnosed for over a year. Fully 30% had been diagnosed more than 10 years ago. So this was a pretty mature group in terms of their experiences in having sleep apnea and being on various kinds of treatments. We had 7% who had pediatric onset, so onset before age 18. And the next slide will show the breakdown of the age groups. But before we go there, Adam or Kim, if there's anything you want to point out about the respondent profile.
So one of the kind of high-level differences between the two groups, and we'll look at the age in a minute, but you can see that based on the different kind of rates of diagnosis by a physician, the people who responded via SurveyMonkey were what I tried to term more diagnostically certain. And you'll see all the way through that they have had more experience with more elements of the care of sleep apnea patients. More of them were diagnosed in a sleep lab. More of them have used CPAP, various medications. They also have more comorbidities and rated their symptoms as being more severe. So it became a really interesting exploration of this kind of older, more medically treated group versus a younger, maybe less well-treated group that responded via Evidation. And I think there's a lot of fruitful additional, mining of that data set to really understand the experience of sleep apnea in those two different populations.
Great. Great point. Okay, the next slide will show the respondents by age groups and the yellow bars, and this will be consistent throughout the data presentation. All respondents, the combined, would be in yellow. The SurveyMonkey obtained through the ASA channels in orange, and Evidation in kind of the darker orange. So you can see that the Evidation group, 51% between ages 25 and 44, was a younger group in general, whereas the SurveyMonkey responses, we had 34% between ages 55 and 64, and 33% 65 and older, to highlight Kim's point. You guys want to make any comments about the age profile?
It's striking to see what the Evidation compared to the SurveyMonkey as far as our organic population with a younger, I would say early adopter outliers and people that are wearing wearables and they're into their health and trying to figure this out, probably more on their own than necessarily in a clinical setting like our survey appears to be showing. So I think it's a hopeful sign that a younger population is much more in tune with what's going on and trying to get answers to their life and make sense of things earlier, so that a lot of these issues, I think, potentially are avoided down the road.
Right. Good point. Okay, next slide. Next slide will show the geographical diversity, with 18% coming from the western and mountain states, 25% from Midwest, 19% from Northeast, and 34% from the Southeast. When we look at national prevalence rates for different disorders and for BMI levels, it's actually kind of consistent. There's a high relationship between diagnosis of sleep apnea and BMI across the country. So this is kind of consistent with those statistics.
And I'll just add that the numbers in black, like in the West, 24% is the U.S. Census figure, most recent census figure, just to compare it to the U.S. as a whole. So we were actually kind of underrepresented in the West and a little bit overrepresented in the Midwest and the Northeast, but not by much. I mean, they're all, and I think it really shows we had good geographic spread.
Right.
Oftentimes in these patient-focused drug development meetings, you get a real concentration of individuals from the DC area who are able to make it there. So I think using this survey helped to get a much more geographically diverse population involved in the meeting.
Right.
And on top of the online participants as well of the actual meeting.
Right.
So it wasn't just subject to local, who was within driving or train distance, but, people that couldn't get there by car, especially patients in our community that have multiple jobs or might be on disability or just have a hard time getting out of the house, were able to sit in and participate for the whole day or part of the day.
Right. Good point. Okay, the next slide shows the co-occurring conditions with sleep apnea. And just to orient you to this table, we list the conditions in the first column, then the breakdown of the total and by platform. And in this table, we add another column for US prevalence of the condition, just so we can have a reference point. So for example, and the other point is that the conditions are listed in descending order for the combined column. So for these 5,600 survey respondents, 45% reported having high blood pressure. US prevalence of high blood pressure is 33%. And we kind of see that going down the line, that the prevalence of some of these co-occurring conditions are actually higher than US prevalence, which we would expect because sleep apnea contributes to a lot of these. GERD at 30%, US prevalence is about 18%. Allergies or allergic rhinitis, 26%. US prevalence is 8%, so almost 3 times higher in sleep apnea patients. Dr. Burson has a lot of interesting insights on that relationship. Diabetes is 20% in our survey respondents, and US prevalence is about half of that at 9%. Restless legs at 19%, and so on.
I think the one that always jumps out to me is the chronic fatigue, and the pain, the fibro. That's almost two times in the U.S. prevalence.
Right.
The other thing that I think is interesting is the survey monkey respondents are almost in all cases higher than the evidation. All of them are more than the U.S. population, but with the exception of depression and ADD, ADHD, the survey monkey respondents have were more likely to indicate those other conditions compared to the evidation group.
Right. Yep, good point. Could be a reflection of the higher age, mean age.
Yeah. Right. Move on?
Yes. So this slide shows the impact of having sleep apnea. So 2 separate tables. The first one is priority activities that can't be done at all or as fully as someone would like. And the implication is due to having sleep apnea. 71% said feeling awake and feeling rested and ready to start the day. That was a big impact of sleep apnea, the ability to sleep through the night. We actually did a research study here where we asked people who were fairly well treated with CPAP, is your sleep disturbed? And moderately or higher disturbed was 60%. So we're seeing consistency with that. And we'll see later on that this sample has a high use of CPAP. Perform as I'd like to at work or school affects about a third of the respondents, and getting through the day without falling asleep affects a third of the respondents. See relatively consistent numbers between the SurveyMonkey cohort and the Evidation cohort on that particular one. Maybe a little bit more sensitive to feeling awake, feeling rested and ready to start the day, a little higher for Evidation platform folks.
I could tell you just today, I know that normally I can make sense of all these numbers, but I know I must not have slept well because they look like a lot of numbers up there.
Yeah. We'll see cognitive difficulties coming up on a subsequent slide.
I thought so.
But that's one of the biggest things that happens with sleep deprivation. Absolutely. The second table, top concerns about living with sleep apnea. And so the potential long-term consequences on health and lifespan was endorsed by over half. It was a bigger concern for the SurveyMonkey folks. The effects of symptoms on physical or mental performance, almost half endorsed that one. And impacts of symptoms on being able to perform daily activities, 40%. So there's some very significant concerns about living with sleep apnea. Kim or Adam, any other comments on this?
There was a question that came into the Q&A that they wanted to know if for the caregiver respondents, do we have a sample of parents of children 0 to 18 with OSA?
There was, it was pretty small. Yeah, we worked in some of the comments from those individuals into the report, but we didn't report that group separately because it wasn't large enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Sarah, we'll get to you. We'll send you the copy of the full report so you can see the exact number.
Sure. Okay, next slide. So these are the top symptoms with severe or moderate impact, and we could start from the right. 40% cognitive difficulties. Goes by different names: brain fog, difficulty concentrating, easily being forgetful. Different descriptors like that all fall under cognitive difficulties. Dry mouth affecting almost half. Unrefreshing sleep, 7 out of 10. 8 out of 10 for daytime sleepiness and fatigue. Sometimes those are considered very similar types of things, which is why we see high correspondence between those two. But these are all
Carl,
the symptoms.
I just want to point out on this graph, the kind of gold color is all of the respondents. That sort of medium orange is CPAP users, current CPAP users, and the bright sort of reddish orange is the non-CPAP users. So even those treated well with CPAP are showing in some places even higher rates of daytime sleepiness than the group overall, which I think is maybe a little surprising.
A little scary.
Right. Yeah. And we should say we asked for how often, for the CPAP users, how often it was used and how many hours per night it was used. And we were pretty surprised with the numbers, which are about 7 nights per week and more than 7 hours per night. It's not uncommon for CPAP users to use it for just over half the night. So I think this particular group were pretty of the people who reported using CPAP. They were quite high users of CPAP, which is great to see. For those who use it, half the night or in a partial use pattern, what oftentimes happens is CPAP's not worn during the most important part of the night, which is during REM sleep, which is what happens in the early morning hours, which when we have REM sleep, the body loses its muscle tone and it's more likely that the airway closes off, which makes it the most important time to wear it. But with this self-reported data, they said they were using it all night, so which makes these numbers, I think, even more concerning, because these are people who are using it the majority of the night. So thanks for pointing that out, Kim.
Sure. I think that's the only graph where the color coding is different.
Right.
It's different, but it's the same, and it's scary.
Mm-hmm. So what was really great about this survey is we asked for, we had items that allowed for respondents to describe and to provide more information about some of their experiences. And so in the lower right on the ribbon, we had over 155,000 words in the open text replies in total. So this is just a gold mine of information about how people are doing with sleep apnea and with treatment. And then this is a word cloud, which the size of the word reflects the frequency of use by respondents. So you can see sleep and CPAP and apnea were some of the biggest mentioned the most in the open text fields. And then we see machine and fatigue and treatment also being pretty big. But some of the, when you take a little closer look, I was really spending some time with this, you can see inconvenience, tiredness, burden, constantly, some of these other words. And this is where I think seeing what is being described in what context is going to be really important. And Kim's already looked at a lot of this and pulled out some of the really phenomenal information there and experiences that people are having into our report.
I almost feel like it's if you were to walk out of a horror film premiere and they were doing a test audience, this is some of the words you would see. Almost scary.
Uncomfortable.
Hey, I know I sound like a broken record, but this is alarming, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Choking.
Again, choking, exhausted, depressed, annoying.
Dementia, death, not happy things.
It's not a pretty picture. It's a very negative outlook, which very indicative of people who are sleep deprived.
Right.
Chronically.
Right. I was just working with a friend yesterday, and AHI was 4 overall without treatment. With oral appliance, it was 0.4, but some of the words used were very consistent with this. So even though the field says below 5 is normal and sometimes below 10 AHI is normal, it's really about the patient experience and how someone feels. And that's probably the most important thing that the field needs to address.
That's always my favorite litmus test was when I meet people, just to see the vocabulary words they're using, whether positive or negative. I basically can generalize and see if they're had a good night's sleep or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the balance of the slides in 10 minutes, so maybe we should pick up the pace.
Yep,
or should we go beyond? Okay. In terms of diagnosis, primary motivating factor to seek a diagnosis, and it really has to do with the symptoms being significant and family member or friends expressing concern. And I know in the clinical setting, the family member or spouse expressing concern is one of the biggest ones. So I was surprised that this one was a little bit lower on this particular survey.
Well, they could only choose one for this particular question, so it really forced a tough, maybe, choice.
Yeah. Right.
Some of the other questions allowed multiple responses.
Right. Good point. And then sleep testing used for formal diagnosis was reported in 76% of the respondents.
And again, I thought it was interesting that 85% of the people via SurveyMonkey had the overnight sleep versus 65 on evidation, but it was about the same percentage of each on the home sleep test. So maybe the younger folks are more often getting the home sleep test before the sleep lab. And we had a whole conversation about that at the meeting, for sure.
Right.
I think it's also an indication of now the insurance companies and providers are really pushing people to have the home sleep study first for the obvious sleep apnea, and then people are then sent to the in-lab for the more complex or co-occurring conditions.
Right. Okay, next slide. This next one shows the impact of symptom severity with and without treatment. So the first one shows without treatment, and the symptom levels are grouped by mild, moderate, and severe. So you can see without treatment, these tables are meant to be, or these figures are meant to be compared with each other. So without treatment, the percent who have severe symptoms is 37% overall, 21 and 50% by platform. But then if you look with symptom severity with treatment, that goes down quite far. And that's what we like to see. That's what we want treatment to do for folks. So very low percentages have severe symptoms on treatment. And then you can see correspondingly, mild was relatively low without treatment, but then relatively high with treatment. Unfortunately, we would rather see those even higher and moderate even lower for those with treatment. So I think this is one of the areas that we really want to address and kind of see what's going on, or are the therapies not fully resolving, and if not, why, and that's an important aspect for the field. Important issue to address. You guys want to make comments on this one?
I think it's alarming, not to replay my broken record, but to see how many people that are still dealing with symptom severity with treatment in the mild range, and that really leads me to substantiate our theory of sleep disorder breathing and UARS, upper airways resistance syndrome, is so much greater via our population than we even have an understanding of. I mean, obviously for the people that took this survey that were severe that are getting treatment, they are doing better. Now we know we don't necessarily have the socioeconomic or the racial diversity that we need in here, which I'm sure would skew those numbers as well. So it's definitely a good starting point as far as the forensic of where we are in the field, but I think it lays a lot of reason to go further and really dive into this, what we do next as far as figuring out what's really going on here.
Right. Agreed. Okay, next slide. Treatments reported. So what this table shows is those who reported being currently on a therapy. So the first row shows currently using PAP, and then the next row in white shows past use of a therapy, so past use of PAP. So for overall combined, 69% of respondents are currently using PAP, 12% had used it in the past, 7% are currently using oral appliances, 11% had used it in the past. Using an expiratory resistance device, low, 3% currently using, 6% had used it in the past. And upper airway stimulation, 3% are currently using it. And what this shows at the bottom is when we asked for the numbers, over-exaggerated a little bit. The respondents using PAP reported 6.4 nights per week and 6.4 hours per night, which is very high. Anything over 6, especially as people get older, their total sleep time is closer to 6 to 7. That's using it for a majority of the night for sure. But what we were really surprised with was the use of oral appliances, because when you look at the medical literature and the objective compliance levels, oftentimes we see CPAP at 3 to 4, maybe 5 hours per night, depending on the sample. And we see oral appliances closer to 5, 6, 7 hours per night. But in this survey, we really found oral appliance use was relatively low, which is surprising. It could be that it was used as a supplement.
Yeah, interesting that there were more past oral appliance users than current, and maybe that's kind of a progression, and more of them were on oral appliances and then had to go to PAP, but just thought that was an interesting finding.
Right. And you know, that's part of the way we had to structure the survey. It'd be really interesting, and it's hard data to get, but to find out how people use it, because once, especially with the number of years that our folks had been diagnosed, it's very common for people to go through a period of using a certain therapy, stop it, go to another one, do a combination. So, but we didn't ask for that. So, yeah, it's difficult to assess in the on how people have used it. Easier to do it going forward. In fact, I have 100 patient files up in the cabinet back there where that's exactly what I'm supposed to be looking at, because it's super interesting on how.
You've been telling me about that for a while, Carl.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, next slide.
Take a look at the medications.
Yeah. So this one looks at the current medications that are being used and reports on the percentages of each. So the top 3 were the SSRIs, nasal corticosteroids, and decongestants. And given the relationship between sleep apnea and depression, it makes sense for the SSRI use, and for the high prevalence of sleep apnea and allergies, it makes sense that those other 2 are quite high as well.
Well, and the use of SSRIs also for pain, chronic pain.
Right. Kind of surprising that hypnotics were as low as they were, but at 6%.
I'm more concerned by the Neurontin and the Klonopin and the Ativan, the anticonvulsants.
Yeah.
That's scary to me.
Yeah. Next slide is on surgical interventions, and the percentage shows the percentage of people who had reported undergoing any of these. Relatively low single digits overall, but we see tonsillectomies and adenoidectomies at 9%, upper airway surgeries 4%, UPPs, UP3s 2%. So relatively low percentages.
I thought it was interesting. There were 11 people via evidation that had trachs, and being a younger, less severely affected, less medically complicated group overall. Obviously, these 11 individuals didn't probably fit that pattern, but yeah.
It's an extreme intervention, but it's one that works.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I would have known this at a younger age. I mean, I know that a lot of my doctors, really think that I maybe should have had the MMA, the maxillary mandibular advancement, or there's actually another technique that they're doing that's a little bit less invasive now. But I've been compliant with my machine, so I would never, put myself under anesthesia and take that risk at this point in my life. But if offered a trach at a young age, knowing what I know now and when I really had it before CPAP was around, I can't imagine that would have been an easy decision to make. Yeah.
Well, it definitely takes adherence or compliance out of the equation.
Yeah.
So and all the difficulty with or the problems that come with a medical device. So, and it probably represents, you know, the closest thing to a quote unquote cure that we have.
And Carl, just for the benefit of anybody listening who may not know what a trach is, just briefly describe it.
Yeah, normally with sleep apnea, the obstruction is occurring somewhere in the upper airway or lower here, but a trach is when they actually surgically create a hole, so it bypasses the need to breathe through the nose or the mouth, and you actually breathe below any areas of the obstruction, which is why it can be considered almost curative for sleep apnea, because it bypasses where the airway would close off.
I think most people know it from movies or TV shows. That's the emergency procedure where someone has to use a pen or something to poke a hole in your airway.
Yeah. Right.
The last one is current supportive strategies.
Yeah, so these are considered adjunct types of things. Weight loss, which I think when we look at how clinical folks practice medicine, it's always something that's recommended if someone's overweight, and we see that 51% tried, so that's great. There's a big role for weight loss. There's some research studies that show just weight loss and exercise alone can result in a decrease in the AHI, but usually not to normal levels, just a reduction. Sleep positioning, if 33% have tried this is another thing on study that practitioners should be talking about, the amount of sleep apnea, the AHI in the supine position versus the non-supine position, so on the back versus not on the back, because positional therapy alone, especially for mild sleep apnea, can be really effective. We were just talking with some people yesterday who said even while on CPAP, they're aware of the position that they're in, because sometimes they're concerned about the pressures being high enough when they're on their back and maybe the airways pinched off even while wearing the mask. Alcohol avoidance is a great strategy. It's a known respiratory depressant. So avoiding that before bed is an important behavioral thing to do. Extending sleep time, increasing caffeine intake during the day, helping with nasal congestion, and meditation or mindfulness. So these are all strategies that our folks have been using on an adjunct basis. I don't think it differs much.
In the report, we'll kind of go into these in a little bit more detail with some of the conversation from the meeting wrapped into these results as well.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how much they mirrored each other, both populations.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Next one is challenges and barriers to sticking with or seeking out treatment. So the treatment being uncomfortable in general is considered a challenge or a barrier to sticking with a treatment. These were the 2 to 3 highest ones, were it being uncomfortable, inconvenient, or there being financial issues related to it, whether it's lack of insurance, high deductibles, et cetera. So those were the 3 primary, and those are the ones we often hear about in the clinical setting too. And then at a lower percentage was concerns about long-term use of it. That's something that's always dealt with. I created a program called the Sleep Apnea Self-Management Program, and that's one of the most important things is people usually, especially at early diagnosis, don't understand that it tends to be a chronic disease, not an acute disease. So these medical devices that are prescribed are really for long-term use. And
I would think the stigmatizing number would have been higher. I feel like we heard a lot of commentary about people in denial and not wanting to have to wear a mask, not wanting the machine by your bed, not wanting to have to, identify as maybe having a syndrome.
Right. So that's only affecting 1 out of 10 people. At least that's what they're reporting. And I think there's a fairly mature group too. So it may be that it's less of a concern for people who are more experienced and have had it for a longer time, versus younger people who are newly diagnosed, or older people maybe having to explain to their grandkids, what is that machine, So that could be an effect. And then the last slide is on experience participating in sleep apnea research. And
there's one more, Carl.
Oh, sorry about that.
One.
Oh, I missed that one. Assuming no cure, what's the most important result from a treatment? And what's really interesting is for the overlap study that we did, we went out to the community to find out what's the most important outcome. And far and away, and it's reflected here too, is to feel better during the day and go about the daily activities that you're interested in. We have a great patient advocate named Hugo Campos, and it's about being independent and not letting the disease get in the way of what you want to do. And I think we see that reflected here too. It outnumbers everything else by a factor of 2 or 3. But then experiencing significant improvements in symptoms that present problems, having fewer long-term health problems, 15% longer life expectancy. And, interestingly, only 5% overall treatment plan that's easier. We really hear that in the clinicals. Do I have to clean this every day? Do I have to wear it every day? So it's interesting that only 5% report that's an issue. But
again, it was a one-choice question, so they had to choose between that and feeling better.
Yeah.
And as Rick Gordon pointed out so profoundly, just like if you have problems with your eyes, first thing you do when you wake up is you put on your glasses, and the last thing you do before you go to bed is take them off. So, we like to tell people the first thing you do before you go to bed is, the last thing you do before you go to bed is put your mask on. The first thing you do when you wake up is hopefully take it off.
Yep. Yep. Go clean it.
Yep.
Make it part of the routine. That's the whole key to it is making it part of the routine. That's a great point.
Okay, now the last one.
Yep, sorry about that. So this one's about previous experience participating in sleep apnea research. And what's really interesting is fully 76% said had never been asked to participate in a research study, and over a third were interested in learning about research opportunities. In our sleep health mobile app study, we had 70% of people say that they had never, not just that they weren't asked, but that they had never participated. So there's a lot of folks. That's what we're trying to do within the ASAA, is increase the number of research opportunities for folks to participate in.
Yeah, I love to point out, even with our sleep health, our ongoing sleep health study on the Apple iTunes store that you can download for free, that 70% of our 12,000 active participants in it's the first time that they've ever participated in a research study. And that's, traditionally research and clinical trials was done in the lab and in person, and the advent of technology, we're learning how to bring the clinic into your home and into your pocket with what we're doing, some of the patient-led, patient-generated data as we go forward.
Right. Agreed. Good. So that summarizes the survey results that we have. And when I gave my closing remarks at the meeting, I think we're still struck by the number of challenges that folks experience before diagnosis and how long it takes to get recognized. Then even the diagnostic process, it's much improved. The wait times are significantly less, but there's still a set of problems that people experience during the diagnostic period, set of problems that they experience during the treatment initialization period, and then a whole nother set of problems about long-term use. And I think what we're doing as an organization is taking a closer look at what are the most significant problems in each one of those areas, and trying to figure out how we can have the biggest effect. And this is a list of some of the bigger problems that we noticed. And they're outlined in more detail of our report in section 4 for people who want to read up on it more. I don't know if you two want to add more to that.
Yeah, I could see this sign on the side of a highway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Kim really did a great job in section 4, because I think the most important thing that came out of this meeting, number one, the meeting was to really help inform FDA. But by talking to our community, we really have a clear-cut roadmap on these issues that we need to move forward on as an organization. CPAP first came out in 1981. It became a relatively big business by the mid 90s. And here we are, 15 years later, and we still have people who are not getting the education and support they need. Bigger picture is they're not getting good information on all of the different treatments that are available to them. And so we really need to figure out how we can help people get the best treatment that they can and then maximize the effect of those treatments that they have.
And I think what's so important about the meeting, about the survey, and about this whole experience of us telling our Sleeptember stories right now during Sleeptember is that we didn't do this to expose it all. We wanted to understand where the field was at currently. And seeing this is, we've got a lot of pain and inflection points all along the journey that could use improvement. The nice thing is we've identified them now. Now, let's put the patient first and see how we can improve each and every one of these aspects and hopefully reduce the negative aspects of a lot of them and turn them into, sort of turn that frown into a smile, or turn the lemons into lemonade.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think what was interesting to me is some of these issues and challenges that were really very uniformly vocalized across the meeting participants and through the survey are tractable issues, like not having enough patient education and support to understand the journey and how to be as successful as possible, improving the DME customer experience, like working on, defining a national research agenda. Like those are all perfect things for patient advocacy to take on.
Right.
Some of the innovation challenges maybe still more rest with the scientific community, but there's a lot here that, the patient advocates themselves are very capable of taking on and removing as obstacles. So I think that's a really hopeful sign for ASAA and the community as a whole.
And thanks to you, Kim, we've now identified them all very clearly, and we have the data to back it all up. Well, it's not me just talking about it. We now have the proof.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's, really the power of these patient-focused medical product meetings is it does give, creates this sort of snapshot of the community at a single point in time. And you get all of these amazing inputs and this crowdsourced knowledge of what that experience looks like. And then it does create a very well-defined roadmap for the future, as Carl said.
Yeah.
It can. You've just got to leverage that opportunity, right?
Right.
Working on it.
Yep.
Questions and answers. So there's a couple of questions in the chat that I can read through. What will the FDA likely do with the data from this meeting and survey? And does the FDA have anything to do with the health insurance coverage, or is that CMS? Let's start with the first one. What will the FDA likely do with the data from the meeting and the survey?
So the meeting and the survey will kind of immediately inform regulatory decisions that the agency may be in the process of making, and those occur, all along the pathway of developing a new medicine or a new medical device, from the FDA having to approve a sponsor's plan for how they're going to collect information in a clinical trial, for what outcome measures they're going to use, for what patient-reported outcomes they're going to measure along the way. And I don't have any evidence yet in the sleep apnea world, but we know from other meetings that has really shaped the dialogue between the FDA saying, your plan is good, but I don't think you're really capturing what we heard at a PFDD meeting was the most important thing to the patients. Kind of go back and tell us what you're going to do to build on this plan so that we're sure we understand how this protocol is really interacting in terms of the patient's preferences, and also understanding, like, you know, the burden of participating in the clinical trial. That I have heard that the FDA has gone back to a sponsor and said, do you realize what you're putting your patients through at each one of these clinical trial visits? Like, don't you recognize that they have all these complicating, you know, regimens that they have to stick to? They've got to have a caregiver bring them to a clinical center. They've got to travel, you know, on average 3 hours to get there. Like, isn't there a way you can streamline this and do maybe some home visits or remote data collection so that you're not burdening the patient community even more through the study? So those are kind of, you know, some of the points along the way when there is a new medical product coming for marketing approval. The FDA draws on the report of this meeting and their experience having attended it as they think through, are the benefits, you know, more outweighing the potential risks and adverse events from the patient perspective? Is this new medication or this new device really treating something that matters, and how much of an improvement would a patient want to see in order for them to be likely to accept the trade-offs of either side effects or potential adverse events? So that's how they use the information that was collected. In terms of the question about insurance coverage, that is not an FDA issue. That is more in the bailiwick of Centers for Medicaid and Medicare and private payers like Aetna and Blue Cross Blue Shield and others. But we have seen some carryover of this information, you know, now that the report is available and the survey responses there. I think, you know, certainly ASAA can be a conduit to all of those other audiences. And we spent quite a bit of time at the meeting actually talking about the payment and coverage policies and how those can be a barrier to adherence, both in terms of the kind of onerous process of getting coverage for CPAP and keeping you know, things up to date based on what the current coverage policies are. So just because this meeting didn't focus on CMS or private payers as an audience, I think that the outcomes from it can certainly translate over into informing more enlightened policy and coverage decisions by payers of all kinds.
Right. Yep.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, it's a great summary.
There was another question from Aaron. Is there a way to get a copy of the slideshow emailed? I know we'll put the webinar up on our sleepapnea.org webinar channel. You guys want to take?
We could post the slide deck as a link on the same page as the report, and people could access those there, I would think.
That'd be a good idea. So we will have that done, Aaron. Thank you for pointing that out. Mother T, our community leader, also had another question here. 33% high blood pressure. How is high blood pressure linked to sleep apnea? I'll leave that to the scientists of the group.
Yeah, I can take that one and answer it kind of generally. When folks have an apnea or hypopnea event, there's either a complete cessation of breath or a reduction in breath. And the body, in order to start breathing again, oftentimes has to wake itself up. And in waking itself up, there's the pulse rate and the heart rate goes back up. And so what you end up seeing is this, for people who might have 30, 50, 200, 400, 500 events throughout the course of the night, instead of having a nice stable heart rate and blood pressure, what ends up happening is with each arousal, the blood pressure and heart rate goes up and then down, up and down. So it puts a tremendous stress on the cardiovascular system when it's happening over weeks and months and years. So that's how it contributes to high blood pressure and cardiovascular problems.
So it looks like those are all our questions that we have to this point. So I know we've gone a little bit over, and I want to be thankful for Kim and her time and taking time out of this crazy day as most of the East Coast is preparing for Hurricane Florence. So we'd like everyone to remember to go home and get some sleep, because without a good night's sleep, you won't make good decisions about what to do next in your storm journey.
Yeah.
So, Carl, Kim, anything else you want to close out with?
No, just thanks to ASAA for undertaking this initiative and having such tremendous response from the community, both at the meeting and in terms of this survey. It was really a remarkable, I think, project from beginning to end, and really tremendous outcomes with a really bright future for how they might translate to better medical options and better care for patients. And that's what it's all about.
Sure is. It's a great summary.
And just remember, we're in Sleeptember. Visit sleeptember.org to see some of our patient stories with some of the patients that were on the panels. And you're more than free to submit any of your story ideas that you think would be appropriate if you'd like to share your experience with sleep and sleep apnea and sleep deprivation and all the other co-occurring comorbidities that might be going on at the same time. So thank you all for today. We will have the recording up on our YouTube channel and up on our website, along with a downloadable version of the slide deck next to the Awake Sleep Apnea report that's already up there. So, Sean, if you could take us out, that would be great.
Yep, just about to. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.